Theosophical Wanderings. How's it going?
Hey, how you doing, man? I
Good.
was listening earlier, but the line was too long and I had to bounce for real life. So
Wonder. Yeah. Yeah.
I just
Understandable.
heard the other gentleman. He said you changed the title. I think it was earlier. Was what's your best evidence that God is loving? I think
Yep.
it looks like it was
All loving. Yep.
all of it.
Yep.
Okay.
So more distinction, because he did point out something interesting. He's like, well, God is loving because he has the capability to love. Just like, and we press that against, say, Schindler, who had a dog and had a wife and stuff like that. So Schindler had the capability of being a loving person, but we wouldn't call Schindler all loving, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
that's
Yeah, I
the
think that's what you're
distinction.
saying. Like somewhere in the mix, he's like loving,
So
but you wanted to get something stronger.
yeah,
Okay, so well, mentally I was kind of more prepared for the other one, and I would just say, and I think we're kind of presupposing that God exists, and this is like an area that I'm kind of recently exploring, trying to
does
look at,
does God
you know,
exist? If
no,
if
no,
God
like the
exists?
loving. Yeah, I already believe that God exists. I'm a Christian, but as far as like figuring out like the atonement and all that kind of stuff, and some of the commonly asked questions. So I would say, in a nutshell, I think the evidence that God is all loving, I'll just take a stab at it, we'll see what happens, is that he gives us himself and he turns himself over and joins us in our suffering. And that's kind of one of the most loving things you can do.
Mm,
And it's even for people that hate him,
mm-hmm.
at least according to the Christian narrative, at least, he kind of joins us in our suffering. And the Bible says, he was tempted in every way that we were, except he did not sin. So I would have to posit from that, like, any kind of dark thought I've had, Jesus was tempted with that. He's also dealt with human cruelty, the whole nine. And then, but the whole point was to overcome the human experience.
Okay.
And I can't really imagine something more loving than that.
Okay. So
Loving to me.
okay. So sounds like it's a lot of it's based in personal experience.
Well, my God belief is, but what I said is drawn out from the scriptures. It's drawn out from the Christian narrative.
Hmm. I see.
Because God becomes incarnate. It's as in Isaiah, it says God with us, and then I'm drawing from like the Gospels. He comes to earth, he's tempted. The New Testament also says he was tempted in every way as we were. So it's kind of my belief is through personal experience and scripture, but where I'm getting the idea that God is loving, I'm drawing that out from the Christian narrative in scripture.
Hmm. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay. I think it does make sense. Although, um, according to James 1:13, that like God, it says that God isn't tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So if you think that Jesus is God, how could he be tempted by evil?
Yeah, I think you'd have to reconcile it because the Gospels, I think it was in Matthew, where it says Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, which
Exactly.
it's pretty explicit. So what you'd have to do is kind of reconcile both of them. So
Yeah.
Jesus, God as man, is tempted of the devil because we believe that Jesus is both God and man.
Hmm.
And the whole point of the incarnation was that he becomes man.
Yeah.
So in his humanness, he's tempted, and that's kind of how you reconcile that.
Okay. So then in that sense, Jesus wasn't God because God can't be tempted.
Well, I mean, he's human. Yeah, his humanness. He's not God as a human, but he's both God and man. That's kind of the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So we wouldn't say he's both God and God. That'd be redundant. But he's
Mm-hmm.
God and man.
Mm-hmm. What percentage of was Jesus God and what percentage was he man?
Good question. I don't think anybody really can put a calculation on that. It's just sort of if you tie the threads together of scripture, tradition, and that's sort of what you come with. We sort of, at least according to church teaching, it just kind of, this is a blanket statement. He's both God and man, the hypostasis. But it's not like a scientific calculation. You don't put anything on. I don't think that's the point of it. It's just to kind of talk about his divine nature and his human nature.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like this rigorous, here's his DNA sample. I don't think they go through that extent, or I don't think that's the point of it either.
Mm-hmm. So, because see, that's the thing I'm trying to understand. Because then if you're saying that Jesus is some part, at least some part God, which if you do believe in the Bible, Jesus healed, performed all these miracles. So was this God performing the miracles, or was this Jesus performing the miracles?
Right. It's the God man. So he's fully God and fully man. So it's
Okay.
that's the whole point of the hypostasis, I believe.
Right.
So it's God and man united.
Right.
Now I don't know any further than that. So
Okay.
Like,
well, because
that's the best I could say.
okay. Well, because I'm just saying that it falls apart under like scrutiny because ultimately it doesn't make 100% sense, because if you look at it from the perspective of if God is 100%, or Jesus is 100% God, 100% man, that means if he's 100% God, he cannot be tempted by evil. If you go to Psalm 5:4, evil does not dwell within God. So there's just no way that he could be tempted, which means that then are we to look at the scriptures where it does say that he was tempted by the devil? Well, how is that possible? How could you be tempted if you can't be tempted? Right?
Yeah, I think you're at that point. You either just kind of abandon the whole idea,
Yeah.
or, well, I mean, but this is what you would do with if you were reading anybody. Let's say you're reading Aristotle or
Mm-hmm.
someone else that's written. You'll find this with any kind of literature. Well, here he says this, but here he says that. And if you're a student of that particular person, you try to reconcile and come up with some way to reconcile it. And I don't think that's a bad thing, and I don't think it necessarily means there is a contradiction. I just think it's it's just sort of the charitable thing to do. Like, I've done that even with political opponents that have said certain things, like, okay, I think they mean this, and you kind of reconcile the two things, just to kind of give them, like, steelman them. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think if we steelman scripture, we're kind of like, all right, I think we should probably try to reconcile this. And then there's all this stuff in the background too. The whole point of, God he's not made of flesh either. And then you're like, well, that's a contradiction. Well, that's the whole point of the incarnation. He comes and dwells as a man and enters into our human experience. And that's the whole point. So as a man, he's tempted because men are tempted. And the whole point is for him to provide a way through this wilderness that we're in to show us as humans, what does God do in temptation? What does God do to kind of make this paradigmatic, this is the lesson. This is how you get through this life. This is how you follow me. And so I think that's the whole point. And when you read the Gospels, it's kind of like, okay, there's all this other data. I can't just say, well, none of it makes sense. Well, it kind of does. I just got to, like, figure out how to make sense with it.
Okay.
That's sort of how it makes sense to me.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's helpful.
Okay. So I think, okay. So then we can kind of test this, what you're saying. If this was to kind of give us a guide through life, I think that's what I heard you say in a sense, like I did like a 10,000 foot, like 3-word, basically one sentence, like summary of what you just said. So if it's just to guide us through life, Jesus or God has just given us these things to help us out. Would you say then that the old Mosaic law was his way of doing that?
I would say at the time there was some kind of provisional aspect to it, because as Christians, we read scripture Christocentrically. Christ is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. So whatever is happening in the Old Testament finds its fulfillment in Christ, and it's kind of subsumed into that. And that becomes the interpretive lens through which we interpret, like, the Old Testament. So I would say provisionally, yes, because, for example, you know about animal sacrifices. That was provisional. That was a pointer to something else. And then when Christ comes, all of that's kind of abolished. Now, I know to people who don't believe as I do, that's just going to sound like a bunch of nonsense. But if you get inside of our heads, it's kind of, Christ is sort of the pinnacle and the lens we interpret all of the previous stuff through. I know that may not be satisfying to someone who doesn't believe.
Well, again, we can explore it. I don't agree that it was provisional. And I can argue how in a second, but I'd like to explore it with you.
Sure.
So are you saying then, just when you say provisional, that it was temporary or conditional until Christ rose from the dead?
Yeah, I think there were certain aspects of it, like for example, the animal sacrifices. Those were pointers, and Scripture calls those types and shadows of what was to come.
Okay.
So, like the Mosaic Law, even Moses himself was a type of Christ. He leads his people from bondage and captivity. And when you kind of look at our this world that we live in, even I'm not sure if you're an atheist or an agnostic,
I'm an
but there's a
agnostic
certain sense of
atheist.
okay. But even for you, I imagine you still have to go through the human experience. There's a certain
Sure.
level of groaning. There's a bondage to it. There's like, man, I wish things were different. You probably have that general look, like people die, people you love, and there's sort of the physical human experience of like, I got to get up and go to work. There's a drudgery to it, and it's kind of like, so Moses is kind of like this archetype of Christ. He's a Christ before there was one. And he leads these people who are under this bondage, and he leads them into freedom. Now it's sort of provisional because in a sense, like Christianity is saying we're all in this exile. We're still in this
Hmm.
human exile. And Christ comes as the new Moses and leads us through that. And he kind of leads us into the ultimate exodus, which is through death itself,
Okay.
and then through to the other side. So I forgot where I was going with that, but that's sort of how I understand it.
Okay.
That
Well,
makes sense.
let me pull it back this way. Um, so you clarified your position. So then also we can explore it from kind of the God angle. Do you believe that God is perfect, unchanging, and all knowing, meaning he never needs to correct, retract, or improve his commands?
Yes.
Okay. So then whatever God commands must have been the best possible command from the start.
I think within if the intention was provisionally, then I would say yes.
Okay. So if the
Like I
intent was
wouldn't say
provisional.
I would yeah, if the intent, I wouldn't say the intent of the Mosaic Law was permanent, unchanging. I wouldn't agree with that because then that would make no sense. But I think if the intent was provisional at that time to accomplish its purpose until something greater came, then yes, I think it did its job, it was sufficient, and it was perfect for that,
Would
I
it
would
be
say.
okay? So would it be fair to say then that God changed his moral standard?
No, I think he clarifies it.
He clarifies it. So it wasn't okay. Well, then that's
Yes.
interesting. So was the Mosaic Law perfect then?
I think it was perfect for its the fact that it was instituted provisionally,
It was
which
instituted
which kind of
provisionally.
means, yeah. So it's sort of like, I think it was perfect for its job at that time. And then this later clarification comes because even when you're reading the Gospels, it says God basically he came through the law, and oh man, I'm butchering the wording. I just wish I could remember the exact wording, but it's in these last days he's revealed himself through his Son. And then even Jesus himself clarifies Moses. He says, like, you've heard it said, if you commit murder, blah blah blah, or if you commit adultery. And Jesus even clarifies it. He goes further. It's not just the action; it's what's going on in your heart. And so there's a lot of that sort of clarification going on, this moral progress, so
Hmm.
to speak, if that makes sense.
Okay. So are you saying then
I think
that
that's for us. I think that's for us, not necessarily from God's perspective, but there's a moral progress for humanity,
like
if that makes
a
sense.
moral progress? So we had to make progress. Now, this is the interesting part, is because it does say, like in scripture, that the law is written on our heart. The moral law is written on our heart. And so if we're saying that so if the law is provisional but the law is written on our heart, why would we need the law in the first place?
Right. I think there's probably a distinction there. I think okay, for example, how would a an ancient Mesopotamian race know that um a Levitical law, for example. Hey, when you approach the altar, you need to go out 7 days if you're unclean or something. I don't think that's what they mean by the law being written on their heart. That's something that's very specific, that's been revealed to Israel. However, I think ancient Mesopotamians have access to the broader, like, moral law, just common sense, natural law kind of stuff. Like, hey, you probably shouldn't kill people. You probably shouldn't steal, things like that. So I think when Paul is talking about like the law is written on their heart, they have access to some degree of the moral law,
Yeah.
not the entirety of it, not the entirety of the Mosaic law. They're not going to know what to do with a sacrifice or a burnt offering, none of that. I think it's just sort of like this general thing that we all have access to, including atheists. We all kind of have a certain common sense, but you're not going to be doing things Christians do that specifically pertains to Christians.
Would that then mean that, so if there was like a basic law was written on our hearts, but not everything, it didn't include everything? Because it seems like then that, see, that's the thing, was like when I read the Mosaic law, it, the law allows for grape marriage, grape, child trafficking, slavery, things of that sort. And are we saying then that the Mosaic law assumed that we knew those things were wrong? Or, how does that line up?
Right. It's a good question. I would probably push back a little bit on the slavery part, because it did say man stealing was to be punishable by death. So I think we have to define what we mean by slavery.
Oh yeah, we can. The Bible does define. Oh, I was just gonna interject this one little piece. The Bible defines what slavery is. It tells you. So, so I just go by what it says.
Right. Well, I mean, it doesn't mean chattel slavery in like American chattel slavery. You can just like grab somebody and now they're your property. I think there's sort of like it means typically like if you're a bond servant, which was a reality at that time.
All right.
Where people had to sell themselves in indentured servitude. There's some of that. There is also slavery. There are war slaves. So there's different.
Oh yeah, definitely,
different levels.
Definitely those. Yeah.
There is buying slaves. There is that for sure. But there were also boundaries to it. It wasn't just, hey, you can do whatever you want. There, like, for example, it wasn't like what we would call chattel slavery, like American, in the South. It wasn't like that.
What were some of the aspects of chattel slavery? Like, what's the distinction?
Man stealing, for example. So how did the Africans become slaves? They didn't volunteer for that. They were
definitely
captured and herded.
They were captured.
Yeah, so that part right there,
they were captured
by death.
Yeah, they were captured from another land, right? From another country.
Yes.
Yep. And yes. were these African slaves, were they inheritable? Like, could you pass them down to your children? And and they would. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So if they
were definitely property, and so
they were property,
there is
right?
Language like that in the Old Testament. There is language.
Oh
like
yeah, there is for sure. Yeah, Leviticus 25.
I'm not denying that. I think there's some nuance to it, though, for sure.
Okay. So well, let's kind of look at this. So it does say, as for the male and female slaves whom you may have, it is from the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves. So that's what we did in the United States, right? We went to other nations around us and acquired male and female slaves. You may also acquire them from among the aliens residing with you and from their families who are with you, who have been born in your land. They may be your property. And then you had described chattel slavery as property. You may keep them as a possession for your children after you, for them to inherit as property. So you said African slaves were inheritable, right?
Yes.
So
the only difference, though, is the man stealing part.
Well,
that would be the difference. That would not happen?
Isn't that what this is? Going to nations around you, that you may acquire male and female slaves. They're not
going to steal them. That's not what that's saying.
They weren't. Well, acquire means a lot of things, right? You can go buy them. You can steal them. You can buy them, steal them, whatever. Acquire just means get
No,
them.
I think this would be a place we'd have to reconcile because it does explicitly say man stealing is punishable by death.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to kind of, if you want to steal man the view, you'd have to
Okay. And is that
nuance
so?
it.
Was this so? This is a little better then. So they didn't steal them; they just acquired them.
And yes, and I would say the other part that's better too is there was also the component of if you harm your slave, you have to recompense them. Now, I'm not saying that that is the ultimate ideal. I'm not saying slavery is the ultimate ideal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying there were more boundaries on Hebrew slavery than there was around the other ancient Near East slave laws. They were not as, they were a lot crueler when you look at other ancient Near East laws
Yeah.
about what you could do to slaves. In the Old Testament, you know, you couldn't just do whatever you wanted to your slave. You'd have to recompense them or set them free, which
Yeah.
is different than American chattel slavery.
So where
As
does
far as
that?
I know, there were no laws protecting. You could just beat them and do whatever you wanted, and nothing protected them. They weren't even seen as humans.
So here's Exodus 21, verse 20. When a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is owner's property. So there's no recompense there.
Yes, let's go. I think it's before that. I don't have it in front of me. Let's see. What is let me see if I can pull that
It's
up.
Exodus 21, verse 20. And I think what
Okay,
I think what I'm getting at is still it doesn't say that here in Exodus 21.
Yeah, there is something, it might be in Deuteronomy where it kind of goes through those kinds of laws in more detail. And it mentions like, for example, in that verse, it doesn't even mention like letting your slave go free if you injure him in a certain way. But that is in the Bible. Let me find out where that's at.
Yeah, it says it right
It
here
might
in
be in
26. When
Deuteronomy.
the slave owner strikes the eye of a male or female slave, destroying it, the owner shall let the slave go, a free person to compensate for the eye. So that's yeah. So if you knock out an
So what does that
eye,
imply?
if you knock out an
Yeah.
eye or a tooth, then you're let go. You're freed.
Yes. Now, how much more would beating them near death? Well, I mean, if it's just an eye or a tooth, and you have to let them go free, how much? I think it would apply even stronger if like you beat them, like put them in a concussion.
I don't know. To
So
me,
I think it's implied.
I think if
I
you
think it's implied.
yeah. So I think when I'm if they beat the slave on the legs and just wail on their legs, but they don't die, they don't lose a tooth or they don't lose an eye, that's okay. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think, yeah, I think if you, no, see, I wouldn't interpret it that way. I think that would be, there's a spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And I think if we steel man the view, now I know as if you're an agnostic atheist, you may not want to do that. But in my head, I'm like, if someone is going to, this is the whole point of what the intention of the Sabbath, too, for example, where Jesus confronts the Pharisees and they're like going by strict letter of the law. Hey, you can't do any kind of work. You can't even rescue an animal on the Sabbath. You can't even feed a human being. And he corrects them. He's like, which of you, when if your animal falls in a pit, you won't rescue that?
Yeah.
And that's the point. I think if that's the heart of God, and if people are going to be, hey, strict letter of the law, we broke his arm, but we didn't knock a tooth out, so we don't got to do anything. I think that's just letter of the law. But there's a spirit of the law where I think that's just a principle, not a strict like, well, let's measure whether his tooth was knocked out versus whether we chopped his hand off, you know, or whatever it was. So I think that's how I would interpret that. I think it's implied, and I think we have to kind of apply the spirit of the law there.
How
If you
would
injure that slave to a certain degree, he kind of gets let free. You know, I think
how
that's how I
okay.
would do it.
How would
But
we distinguish that between that's actually how it was and spin?
you mean like how did it play out historically,
Well,
or
because it really sounds like there's a justification for this, that it wasn't that bad. And it sounds like we're like we're minimizing this, that it wasn't so bad, that being a
yeah,
slave back then wasn't that bad, and there were ways that you could be freed, and they actually didn't, it wasn't that harsh. However,
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Let me be clear. I'm not trying to minimize it at all. I'm relativizing it in comparison with what else was going on in other cultures.
okay.
I would say it was some level of progress was going on. Now, would I say, hey, that's the ideal? That's a great way to be permanent about it? No, I would not make that claim, and that's sort of why I think it's provisional. I think there's probably a level of God is sort of condescending a bit to a barbaric time, a barbaric people, and that I think he acquiesces to some of those things.
You said earlier that, God has perfect morals, perfect, he this was all provisional. Did God know that in the year 2025 that there would not be a single country on earth that legalizes slavery?
I would imagine, but I would disagree. There are countries that allow slavery. I
They
think in the
they
Middle East
practice it.
is.
They practice it, but they have laws against it on the books. So
Well,
yeah,
how do they
slavery
practice
still
it?
it still happens. We have slavery in this country. We have slavery in the United States, and it's against the law. It still happens. It's just it happens under people's noses. But every country.
Oh, I was under the impression it was maybe in certain countries it was permissible,
mm, mm-mm. There's
not
laws
Western
against.
countries.
Yeah, there's laws against the books. It's that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying that every country has laws against it. And part of it is because, like, if you want to be, like, say in the G20, or if you want to be in the United Nations, you can't have these laws on your books. So part of it is there's like economic or political incentive to do that if you want to be recognized as a country. um, you know, Things like that. If you want to get human aid, there's other countries will pressure these countries to say, hey, you got to do something about this. You have to have a law. That doesn't necessarily mean it wipes it out. It just means that it's not legal. If that makes sense. So, so what I'm trying to ask then is, if God knew that because you said you imagine God knew this, then if he knew
Yes.
that it would be like this, and he knew this at the time that he commanded the Israelites to follow these laws, then why couldn't he have just said, don't take slaves?
I'm sure he could have. I know there are examples where God tolerates certain things uh, for a particular time. I mean, he also could have abolished war. There could have been a lot of things that could have happened, but I think within the human experience, there is certain ways he acquiesces to our human condition,
Mm-hmm.
rather than because I think if either he eliminates all of it at once, and then we're just in the eschaton, or there's a certain level of tolerance to certain things given a certain time. Um, I mean, it just seems like that. Like, I think you could probably extend it from just slavery. The basic question is, why didn't God just come in and drop water wells, drop factories, and you know a equal economy and all that? Like, why
Well,
didn't you could always ask that question?
we're
He
not talking
didn't.
about that. We're talking about, like, moral behavior, because we have, because you would agree we have laws against, like, for example, what do you think is more harmful, stealing or slavery? What's more harmful?
Uh, I would say I would say generally probably slavery. If you mean
So
by
we
slavery, you mean something like chattel slavery,
which I
where they're like,
which we talked about in Leviticus, yeah. So there was chattel slavery
yeah,
back then,
something,
yeah.
yeah. There, I mean, there's a certain sense where there's the other sense of slavery where yes, you are owned by someone, but you have sold yourself into that ownership, and you
Yeah,
have a great relationship with your owner. They treat you well. I mean, there's that went on
I'm
too.
I'm
I'm not
talking
saying
about
that's the
the
general
I'm talking about the slavery
worst
that's
case
in,
scenario.
yeah. I'm talking about the slavery in
Worst,
Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. That's chattel slavery. That's exactly what that
yeah. Okay.
is.
I mean,
Yeah. Is that
we could say,
worse? Yeah.
yeah.
You say that's worse
Let's
than
just grant
stealing?
that. Let's just grant that.
Okay.
Let's
So,
grant that it's worse. Yeah.
okay. So we have a specific commandment, do not steal, but we have no commandment for no chattel slavery. So if chattel slavery is
I agree.
more harmful than stealing, then it doesn't. So doesn't that give you pause? Like, why? How does that make sense? If God is morally perfect, and why did God opt to command us specifically not to steal when we both agree, when many people agree that's less harmful than chattel slavery?
Right. So if I hinged my entire God belief on that one point, then I think it would be tough. However, I think if I look at the entire picture of, if I look at, bird's eye view of the total sum evidence, I look at that as like, that's a puzzle. I don't know. I don't
Hmm.
know. To me, if I'm going to ask that
That's fair.
question, I'm going to ask a lot more. I'm going to ask a lot more questions like, well, why would God just limit it to, let's say he did say something explicitly against slavery right there at that moment. Let's say he did that. I think he could have, you could ask that question about several other things. And then we're kind of like, but I don't know what we're in this human condition. Here's where we are. It's playing out. And there's all these other ways that God enters into it. I see all these other ways that I have evidence for God that kind of soften that. They don't make it. It's just a puzzle in a larger picture of like, it's sort of like this. The way I look at it is like a scientific theory. So, for example, right now, most people believe that the reality is intelligible. The
Hmm.
world is intelligible.
Hmm.
We can find things out about it,
Hmm.
and we kind of hold to that. But there are things that are inconsistent with that. For example, when scientists try to reconcile quantum mechanics with general relativity, they contradict. That doesn't mean we just throw out the whole thing because there's a pocket of contradiction or a pocket of tension. And so, like, let's say I grant your point there and say, I don't know how to solve that. I don't know why God didn't do that. That doesn't erase all the other evidence that I have, at least for myself, that God exists. That wouldn't put me in a tailspin. I would just say, I don't know, but I do see bits of boundaries put in the law, and I also see in the DNA of Scripture itself the lock and key to undo slavery, which is kind of what you see later on, because it's the abolitionists were Christians, and you're drawing on the Christian worldview, and I think that wins out in the end, even if it didn't happen right at that moment. And that's
Yeah.
sort of how I make sense of it. I don't. It doesn't put me in a tailspin, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Well, I guess that's the thing, and so we're only looking at one aspect of this. I would say then that I guess my final question before we hit the kick poll would be, well, what would put you in a tailspin? Like,
I
what
think
would it
for
take?
me,
Yeah, what would it take? Because if slavery
for
doesn't do
me,
it, like if we add on genocide, if we add on child trafficking, if we add on grape, would the combination of those do it?
I'd have to think about it. I think for me, no, because here's the thing for me
Kids getting raped, would
is
that do it?
well, I'm not sure kids are getting raped and if that's commanded, like God is saying to go rape children.
Well,
I
like
know there's sayings about
underage
like when
underage
you
girls, yeah, they're
that's yeah, but that's contextualized. I mean like they married 13-year-olds then. I don't think
yeah,
that's probably cultural.
okay.
Like I mean we did that in this country 100 years ago.
Sure,
That
sure.
changes.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
changes.
you're right. And I think it was a
You
lot of
know.
that was biblical, and we don't do that now. And I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. It's like, well, let me kind of
Right.
put it this way. We'll do this one little thing, and then
Sure.
we'll call it. Do you have any daughters? Do you have any nieces? Anything like
I
that?
absolutely have daughters. Yes,
Okay,
I have daughters. I have
I got a daughter
little
too.
boys. Yep.
Okay.
hmm
Can you see any situation where you would sell your daughters into slavery? Any situation at all?
Right now, no,
Right now?
no. Well, if I grew up in, let's say, Pakistan, and I was not in the comfort of where I lived, and I was in a desperate situation, I might have a different. I'm not saying it's right, but it might be a by slavery. Do you mean like indentured servitude type thing,
It could
or
be chattel, it could be indentured, any type of slavery.
yeah, I mean, people make these types of decisions a lot of times in third world countries, and I'm not saying it's. I think I would probably have a different perspective on that. I'm not saying it's right, but I would not have a Western mindset if I was growing up in Pakistan.
Okay. Is
I
there
would
any,
ask. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
you
Go ahead.
you
I'm
wanted
sorry.
to ask, I've been asking you a bunch,
I
so
would.
yeah, it's fair. You can
I
ask me
would see.
something.
Here's the thing for me. It's kind of like here's a problem for me. Is it's like let's just grant everything in Scripture that's like problematic like that. When you close the Bible, and what is your name, by the way?
I go by Trust. Just call me Trust.
Trust. Okay, trust. When you close the Bible, trust, you still have to go out into the world. You still are dealing with bad people. You're still seeing bad things happen.
Yeah.
How do you're routinely appealing to some kind of moral law.
Yep.
So you can close the Bible and you're like, okay, how do I make sense of this moral law?
Mhm.
Like that I would condemn the Christian God over. I would talk to Christians on a TikTok live and ask them to think about these. This all presupposes these moral objections are getting at something
Fair
true.
question. Fair
But if there's
question.
a
Yep.
yeah, if there's a moral law,
Fair
where
question.
does that come from, and why? How does naturalism predict that?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like
Fair
I
question.
can close the Bible and go, I just can't figure this out. But I still have to go out into the world and deal with. There's all this other evidence for God that runs me right back, and I just kind of sit in tension with it because I'm
Fair
like, well,
question.
this makes more sense to me. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
That's a fair question. And I will say that naturalism in and of itself doesn't explain these things, doesn't, because that's not what naturalism is, right? That's kind of like saying, how do numbers explain, why peaches taste the way they do? That the two aren't like compatible like that. So what we look at is a set of morals, right? Morality. And so I would say that your morality comes from the Bible, from God, right? I'm just doing a
Yeah, I would
comparison.
say,
Yeah, I'm doing a comparison.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
answering your
I
question.
believe
Yeah.
yes, like God grounds morality. It's a transcendent morality comes
Okay.
from a transcendent source.
Just
I would say roughly.
just making 100% sure. I don't want to
Yep.
assume what your position is. So if that's the
100.
case. Okay. So like me personally, like, okay, there are a lot of naturalists, atheists, agnostics who appeal to subjective morality. And I would honestly argue that this, like what you're grounding in God as your moral standard, would also be subjective because it's subject to the mind of God. I personally, I take on an objective moral framework grounded in the laws of logic, and I can explain. It's going to take a minute to explain it to you, and you're probably going to have a few questions. So, and that's fine. I can take you through it. So, essentially, how I see that is that we have beings on this planet who have moral agency, meaning that we have beings who can take responsibility for their moral decisions. And I would say those are adult humans that have like no mental disabilities or anything like that, like you and me. I'm assuming that you have no mental disabilities. You sound like you don't. So I'm
No, I
assuming
do
that.
not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting old, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm old too. I'm an old head too. So maybe that is in itself. However, like a 90-year-old with Alzheimer's, I would say does not have moral agency because they can't really take moral responsibility for their decisions, right? They just can't. Now we would say they are sentient. So there's two pieces to this. There are moral agents who are also sentient, and then we have those who aren't moral agents but are also sentient. So for example, children and adults with Alzheimer's would be beings who are sentient, and what we ought to do is we should assure their well-being. So you're teacupping. I don't know if you went away. Maybe you have a call, but
Hello.
yeah.
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 Oh,
Okay.
I had some kind of update on my phone or something. I'm not
Oh,
sure what.
okay. Yeah, no worries.
Kinda frozen.
Yeah, no worries. So I was I don't know if you heard that last part about children and
I did.
kids with Alzheimer's. Okay.
About sentience.
Yeah, they're sentient, but they don't have agency. Like children don't have agency. They can't really take responsibility for their moral decisions, right? Moral responsibility. Like if I don't know how old your children. I have a 14-year-old daughter. She has a little bit more moral agency than say a 7-year-old? Like if she stole candy at the store versus a 7-year-old stealing candy at the store, she has more riding on it than say a 7-year-old, right? You'd agree with that?
Right.
Like they wouldn't send the 7-year-old to
Yes.
juvie. They might send my daughter to juvie for that, right?
Yes.
So she has a little bit more at stake, and it's just because she's reaching the age of majority. Um, However, the likelihood is decisions that she makes, she's not really, I'm responsible as the parent. So that means that I ought restrict her freedom in some ways to enhance her well-being, right? Like I'm not going to let her, drink alcohol or do drugs or stay out all night, nothing stupid like that. I'm going to protect
Right.
her well-being, because she can't make those decisions. And that's for morally that I should do that. Would you agree that all human beings are at least entitled to well-being? And it's whatever,
I would
however you
say
define
that.
well-being, it's however you define it. Yeah. It doesn't really
Yeah, I
matter.
would say. Yeah, I would say largely in part. I would say that. And let me know when I can ask you a couple questions because
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
listening.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a long drawn out answer, so I apologize. And if you need to
Yeah,
jump in and
no problem.
clarify, feel free. Just interrupt me and say, hey, I got to clarify something. So feel free. So by and large, yes, I agree with you. I think all human beings deserve well-being. Um, I don't think however, not all human beings deserve freedom. Like, for example, human beings that have committed crimes, they don't deserve freedom, yet they do deserve well-being. Would you agree with that?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think you like you're not just gonna like leave them out
Like,
in the weather in the forces of nature or whatever.
right.
Yeah,
Like
I got you. I
chain them
got you.
to a pole
They
outside,
have
right?
dignity.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have
Some
dignity.
dignity. Yeah. They're going to have
Yeah.
like a bed. They're going to get food, be able to take showers, stuff like that. Yeah. Have clothes to wear, even though, it'd be prison gear or whatever, but still some level of dignity. There would be some level of well-being. Um, so, so so it's safe to agree that like people like you and me, theosophical, we deserve freedom and well-being just as moral agents. Like we're at the top of that, right?
I think so. I
Yeah.
would grant
Okay.
that.
So I agree with that as well. I would say that that is pretty objective. Okay. Now there are some people who do not agree with that, like Hitler, like Stalin, people like that, dictators. They don't agree that all people are entitled to freedom and well-being. Um, However, I would say then that they think that they are entitled to freedom and well-being. Would you agree with that? Like, would you say like Kim Jong-il, Stalin, those type of guys, they think they're entitled to freedom and well-being?
Yeah, well, let's say,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So
maybe to some degree.
okay, so under the laws of logic, which are the law of identity, law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, we'll focus on the law of non-contradiction. If a person says, I am entitled to freedom and well-being, yet you are not entitled to freedom and well-being, that's a contradiction, because there is no difference. Like if I said that to you, if I said, hey, theosophical trust is entitled to freedom and well-being, but I don't think you are, I would call that a contradiction. And the reason why is because there is no discernible difference between you and me as moral agents. Does that make sense?
I would disagree with you on that.
You would disagree that
Not
there's no
personally.
discernible difference between us
No, not personally. I
as
wouldn't,
moral
but I would say
agents?
on a naturalistic worldview, I would, because this is sort of the same argument that people make about the unborn. There are different degrees of moral agency, different degrees of capacity.
Correct.
And yeah, so maybe some people are worth more. Maybe it's not that Stalin, for example, Hitler, to excuse my French, he had mentally handicapped people put to death,
Exactly.
or anybody that was mentally retarded. And what did he base that on? It wasn't the Imago Dei. Like they had no inherent dignity. It was based on their capacity, their
Correct.
usefulness.
Correct. Yeah.
And so
And that's and
I think
well,
you could make a case on naturalism that, hey, they're not identical.
yeah.
Maybe Stalin was like, hey, I do have the right to well-being, but you don't, because you're different from me. I
Yeah.
see you as subhuman. There's nothing on naturalism that says anything else.
Okay.
Naturalism predicts nothing like that. You know
Okay.
what I mean?
One thing is, don't say the R word because it's ableist and it could get me restricted. So maybe say like mental
What
disabilities,
was that?
the R word, um, the
Oh,
mentally R word.
RET.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
I
my
can't say
bad.
that.
Oh,
It's
I'm new to
ableist and it
TikTok.
will,
I'm new.
yeah, it's TikTok. Yeah. They'll restrict my life.
They
So
will.
say,
Oh, snap. Okay, got
yeah,
it.
yeah, just say, down,
Mentally handicapped.
mentally
Yeah, we're
handicapped. Yeah. Mentally disabled, something like that. Yeah. I totally agree with you. And again, you kind of refer back to what I said earlier. Naturalism, this doesn't have anything to do with naturalism. This is about a moral framework, and naturalism isn't a moral framework. That's what I was trying to explain earlier. So under objective moral
right.
realism, yeah, what Stalin did in terms of that, unaliving, mentally disabled, people like that, that is immoral. And the reason why is because those people, even though they may not have full moral agency and entitled to full amount of freedom and well-being, they're still entitled to freedom, well-being, and they're sentient. So it would infringe upon their right to have well-being to unalive them. Yes, to take their lives. So that's immoral.
Where do those rights come from in a world that they have no purpose? They were created with there was no creation. They're just here randomly.
Like I
Where
said,
would that right come from?
my objective moral realism is grounded in the laws of logic, because, and the reason why I ground them in the laws of logic is, here, let me finish this point and then I'll let you jump in.
Yeah,
The reason I ground them in the laws of logic is because the laws of logic are evidentiary, they're self-evident, and they're foundational. And the reason the way you can test that is try to explain the laws of logic without using the laws of logic. And you can't do it. So that makes it foundational and it makes it self-evident. And so even so, you would agree that God used logic, the laws of logic, to create the universe in your worldview. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
because he had to identify things, right? Let there be light, and there was light, and light. God saw that it was good. That's the law of identity, right? So he had to use the laws of logic in order to create. And so that, to me, that means that I think in your world you would say, well, that's a attribute of God. It's just inherent in God. I would say, well, since I don't believe in a God, you still have the laws of logic that are left. They haven't gone away. That makes them, and you can't do anything without the laws of logic. You can't think, you can't figure out stuff. You and I can't even have a conversation with it, right? So that means that it is self-evident and it is foundational. So if it's self-evident and foundational, that means that I can safely deduce that and the foundation that a person who is mentally handicapped being unalived is immoral because it's contradictory. Because what Stalin was saying is, I'm entitled to well-being, but that person is not. I'm a sentient being. I'm entitled to well-being, but that sentient being is not entitled to well-being. That is a contradiction. Therefore, it is immoral. So that's how we get to that.
Here's how I would respond to that. I'd make maybe two distinctions, and then maybe I can give you the last word on this because I probably will have to go.
Mhm.
I would say the laws of logic are not the same thing as ethical truths. Logical truths are not ethical.
It's not. Yeah, you're right.
We can grant the laws of logic, and how they're necessary, but that they don't get you morality in and of themselves. The other thing I would probably call into question is, sure, A is A, if what you're talking about is A. All Stalin or Hitler would have to do is say, hey, I'm not talking about two identical things. I'm saying I have the right to these things because I have the capacity for them. Someone who is mentally handicapped or truish, or what, I don't know how you would say that on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
They are not the same as me. And he could make a case for that, and he could say, he could make up whatever case he wants. He wouldn't be contradicting himself, and he could actually use logic to make that case.
Actually, he would,
because he could just say, "Well, A is not A." I'm saying A is not B, and the mentally handicapped are I'm A, but they're B. and I'm sentient and they're not sentient as I am. They don't even know this is happening.
Yeah, I know you
They're
got to go, but I got to push back
conscious.
on that point a
Yeah,
little bit because
sure.
that's not how the law of identity works. So if somebody says, "Well, I'm sentient," but they're not, because that's the test. Is this person sentient? And
Well, how does logic get you to that
we
test?
can
How does
demonstrate.
logic tell you?
Well, the reason why is, well, because like with the law of identity, is Schindler a
Well, it
sentient
doesn't
being?
tell you that sentience should be protected. Logic doesn't tell you that. That's something else
No,
does.
it doesn't. It doesn't tell you. Well, what tells you that sentience should be protected is the person who is sentient that says, "I am entitled to freedom and well-being." And so then that means that anyone else who has freedom and well-being is entitled to free. Anyone else who is sentient, excuse me, anyone else who is sentient is entitled to freedom and well-being. Because what else is the distinction between one sentient to another sentient? Because that's the test. The sentience. That's it. Not sentience
I would say
and
capacity.
sentient. Well, then that's sentience and capacity, but that's not what this is about. What this is about is sentience.
Well,
And if they're saying, well, they don't
could you
have the
define
same
sentience? Make
sentience
sure I'm on the same page.
is awareness of self. So, like, for example, a jellyfish doesn't have
There's
sentience.
different capacity. A baby is not as sentient as
Of course,
you are.
but that's it. That's
They're
just
not.
it's
There's levels of.
it's not the extent of sentience. It's just sentience. So if a baby is aware, is self-aware, that means we don't unalive babies, right? We just don't unalive babies. We just don't do it. Like, even if, say, it would still, would
How do
you?
you know they're self-aware though? Like how? What's the metric for? Like I was under the impression babies really aren't self-aware. I mean they breathe. I mean like a newborn.
They have
Like, how
some
self-aware are they?
self-awareness. Yeah. Like,
They know who they are. Like they know.
yeah, they have very basic levels of self-awareness. And we can demonstrate that from about 22 weeks, when they're still in the womb at 22 weeks. Like, they're aware that they have very, very basic levels of sentience, like awareness. Like dogs are sentient. Like, dogs are like aware, like self-aware and aware of the world. Like, so if a dog sees its own paw, it knows that's its paw. So like a baby sees its own hand in the womb, it knows it's its hand. It'll grab its hand and all that other stuff. So that's what a basic, extremely basic level of sentience is. You are right. Like I remember when my kids were little toddlers and they saw themselves in the mirror for the first time and they freaked out. I don't know if that happened with your kids, but it happened with mine. It was kind of funny to watch. And then they, first, I think one of my kids thought it was another kid and they tried to and then they quickly figured out, oh, that's me, because it's doing the same thing I'm doing. And however, like lack of sentience would mean, like, if a baby saw its hand, it didn't know it was its hand. Like, it knows it's its hand.
Do you know for sure the baby knows this is my hand?
We
Is it
have
having a thought?
we have
Or
scientific
just-
research. Yeah, we have research that
I'd have to
that
look
points
at
to
that. I've never
that correlates. Yeah, strong correlation. Yeah, it's
There's
neuro.
between like a reflex or like, hey, there's.
If
But
what,
knowing like that is me, that is my hand. I'm not aware that a baby. But anyways, I'll grant your point and I'll let
Okay.
you finish up.
okay,
Yeah.
if you DM me later, I can send you a couple resources on it if you'd like. If
Yeah,
you
sounds good.
yeah, if you shoot me a DM. Okay, so anyway, so sentient beings, if one sentient being has enough to say, I deserve freedom and well-being, yet this sentient being does not, and the bar is just sentience, not level of sentience, right? So it's not the hierarchy of sentience, just sentience itself. If they agree that they do, and the other person and the other sentient being does not, then that's a contradiction. And if it's a contradiction, that means it's immoral. So that's how we use the laws of logic to ground objective moral realism. So that's how we do it.
Gotcha. I would push back on some of that, but we
Sure.
can save that for another time.
Come on back and we can talk more. Maybe I'll have a live
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
objective moral realism. And
How often do you get on?
I'm almost every day right around this time. I'm a little bit later than usual, but usually I stay on till about 7:30 Eastern. So
Okay.
but yeah. But it was a great conversation. I really loved.
Sounds good, man.
I don't really get I don't get a chance to talk about this piece of morality much.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice. Yeah.
Were you a Christian previously?
I was.
Or I'm just curious.
I was born and raised Christian. I was actually gonna go into the seminary at one point, and long story short, didn't happen. Yeah. So
Okay.
here I am.
How long would you say you have been deconstructed or lost your faith?
I'd say about 14 years or so.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's been a while.
All right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, great stuff,
Cool. Well,
Theosophical.
it's great.
I appreciate the
sir.
cordial conversation. It was really nice. So,
Absolutely. I love it. It's very hard to find that on the internet, man, for sure.
not going to lie, you're right. But hey, here we are.
Yep. Yeah, much appreciated.
All right.
Truth. I'll talk to you later, man.
All right. Have a good one. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Bye.
Okay.